Fabulous. Thanks for having me, first of all. So I am most interested in a lot of different layers of language and how to bring these together. So this starts from the sort of smallest scope, psycholinguistic experiments looking at how people process language, on individual features, sort of small scale things. And then I've looked at sort of multi-word expressions, combinations of words, how these come together and how we can compare and contrast these. And in my research that I'm doing at the moment, I'm looking at discourse level language and how this could have an influence on society, the language we use to communicate, the language we consume online and offline, etc. So what brings all of this together for me is my interest in methodologies, in explainable methodologies in particular, my interest in sort of computational approaches to all of these problems. And the core interest, I think, is it's almost like solving a puzzle of how can I compare data that is so different. All of it rooted in language, but trying to find multi-layer systems that can process all of this information at once, trying to connect up these research topics.
Beyond the title?
Yes, so today I'll have the pleasure to be talking about some of the discourse work that we've been doing. We've been trying to find methods and frameworks that allow us to automatically classify texts into smaller units that could characterize these texts as a particular mode of discourse, is what they're called, or I would say a meaningful unit, so we can track progress or change through, in this particular lecture, from sort of 18th, 19th, 20th century to now, and to use this to also contrast statements made from different groups of people. We'll also look at an example of current modern English Reddit discussions of democracy, where we'll use the same framework to look at sort of the usage of language from different political actors. Okay. So really a sort of wide scope, and it all boils down to the method yet again, as things tend to with my research.
Yes. Tell us about this. Yeah.
Yes, definitely. So it was a big change, professionally and personally, to be back in Germany. And as someone who did a bit of higher education, also higher education in Germany, and then the rest of it in the UK, then did a bit of professional or career events, etc. And the first steps of my career in the UK, now coming back to Germany, it feels like I've gone full circle, which is very nice. And there are definitely differences that I perceive in the daily. One of these is whenever I do teaching here in Germany, despite the fact that I'm teaching a technical crowd, it's mostly, we're the chair for computational linguistics, so we have a lot of IT students. They tend to be, at least the home students, bilingual or trilingual, with a lot of varied language backgrounds. And in the UK, the home students weren't all bilingual or trilingual because there's no formal requirement for multiple languages in their school education. So here in Germany, it feels a little bit more like everything becomes a comparative or contrastive, because the examples we use or the sort of interests and topics that students bring from their own backgrounds are a bit more varied, which is actually quite nice. And then on sort of a larger level as well, there's a bit of a shift in tone in the whole research and teaching space, I would say. And I would say, from my experience or from my perception, it's a bit of a, it comes down to the perceived politeness and strategies of how direct someone is in the working life. So it's been interesting to see how I adapt back to the German standards. Yeah, but it's been a very valuable experience to be in the UK and to be experiencing how things are around there. And it's also been lovely to come back to Bavaria, to come back to Augsburg, and experience how everything is run here.